Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show, Monday, December 1st, 2025, 12th and final month of the year. Hopefully not the 14th and final week of your fantasy season as we head into the final week of the regular campaign. Playoffs just 2 weeks away. Kyle Dvorchak, that means waiver wired stakes are higher than ever. You either got to make the one final killer ad to save your year or one really good addition that you might be able to play during the fantasy playoffs. I feel like it's a little bit better week than it has been in recent vintage, but not a whole lot better. Who is the single best fantasy ad of the week as we head into week 14? Again, the final week of the fantasy regular season.
Let's do it. Let's have a little fun. A player I drafted a ton of, specifically in these larger best ball tournaments, thinking if he just finds a spot in the Indianapolis rotation at wide receiver, I'm going to be rich. And boy, did he not find a spot. That is Adonai Mitchell in the Indianapolis rotation. But not only has he found a spot since being traded to the Jets, he has found the number one spot, specifically because Garrett Wilson's out. But Garrett Wilson, I believe, on IR, if I remember correctly. And probably not returning. Why would he return to a lost season? That leaves monster volume up for grabs for Adonai Mitchell, who over his past 3 games has a 30% target share and 60% of the team's air yards. Like over the course of a whole season, I would say that would be number one, but that would be an understatement. It would be number one by a country mile because that's not something you can sustain, being that much of your team's offense. He probably won't end the season with a 60% air yard share as a Jet, but even if he drops to 50 or 40, it would still be an insane number. And he finally made good on the promise of all those air yards, which were completely inedible for 2 weeks, to the tune of 8 catches, a little over 100 yards, and a touchdown last week. He looks like even in Indy, he looked like a good football player. He looks like a dude who can get open, especially intermediate and deep at will. He just never completed the play, whether it was catching the pass or walking into the end zone. And he'll probably have some dumb mistakes with the Jets for the rest of the season too. But what are they going to do? Not play him? Are they going to play Allen Lazard over him? Even like John Mechie, who's getting a full complement of routes, can't really hold a candle to Adonai Mitchell in terms of target earning potential and air yards earning potential. It's just Adonai Mitchell is the team's wide receiver one, probably until the end of the season, but at least for a few more weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you said it beautifully. To like put a fine point on it is that we finally got proof of AD Mitchell concept. Like surely at some point this guy has to spike a week, and the answer was always surely he does not, and finally did it. And 2, I love how Kyle, it was on multiple fronts. It wasn't just the big play, the 52-yard touchdown where, as you mentioned, he runs right by Mike Hughes. Like this seems like he can get open at will deep if the play is long developing enough. He runs right by him. Then he actually has to come back to it. It's a bit of an underthrown ball. Makes a great sliding catch in the end zone. So we get the big play, but we also got the volume. 12 targets for AD Mitchell I don't think anyone could have seen that coming. 8 catches. And everyone knows, if you're the kind of fantasy player who's reading Rotoworld, who's listening to a podcast like this, you know that it's just like, all right, AD Mitchell's safe from here on out. But just to finally have proof of the ceiling concept, we know all about the floor. It's shaky. I completely agree that AD Mitchell, you have to treat him at least as a wide receiver 4 now. He's not someone you have to get into your lineup, but he is now, if you need upside, if you're rummaging through bench options and you just want someone who can maybe change your matchup, we finally have proof of concept that it could be AD Mitchell. And by the way, the thesis of the AD Mitchell play was always going to be catching passes from Tyrod Taylor on the Jets. Everyone knew that in summer best ball drafts. We all knew that. We also all knew that Jacoby Brissett was going to become the single most important player in fantasy football. Kyle Dvorchak, 3 straight 300-yard games. His 4 on the season are tied for Dak Prescott for the most in the league. He now has Marvin Harrison Jr. back, or we think so. Maybe he'll be out with his heel injury, which is more serious than I realized when I was watching the game yesterday, by the way. Just slinging it all over the yard. Stuntman Chuck is wondering, is Jacoby Brissett just a set and forget top 12 quarterback the rest of the season? I ranked him as such for week 13 when all 32 teams were active. I just don't see anything to change this. Do you? I mean, we all know the Joe Flacco's of the world stop Flaccoing at some point. There's just been no indication Brissett is about to do that. Can we trust him? Famous last words for the fantasy playoffs, Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah, 100%. And it's very possible, if not likely, that he has at least one dud, much like Flacco did periodically with the Browns, then with the Colts. Then they were all duds with the Browns the second time around, but then he completely got back on track, mostly with the Bengals again. When your game is almost entirely based on volume passing and not even efficiency. If a team can just take the ball out of your hands a decent amount, honestly, if they play like a close, ugly game, that'll be a nightmare script for Jacoby Brissett. But that is the like once a month type of scenario, because most games, the Cardinals defense is bad. Their opponent scores points. The Cardinals throw the football a lot. And that works out really well for Jacoby Brissett. In fact, his lowest weekly finish since taking over as the starter is the QB 13. He has nearly a QB1 floor. Like, that's not his median projection. His floor is, as it's gone so far, the QB 13 with still 17.4 fantasy points in that game all the way back in week 10. Yeah, I really don't see how you could possibly rank him as anything other than a top 12 quarterback. The lack of elite rushing potential, and frankly, just the lack of him being all that good is the difference between him being a top 5 passer and a top, call it 10 passer right now.
Trey McBride has made 7 career starts with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, has 7 touchdowns in those 7 games. He's made 38 career starts with Kyler Murray at quarterback. He has 5 touchdowns in those games.
It's so pathetic, man. I get things are they're just doing fun volume stuff with Jacoby Brissett. It's not like he's not changing the way the franchise is going to play. But come on, man.
It has had me thinking football philosophical. Why are the stats so much better? Why is this good player actually scoring? But why are the outcomes not really any different for the Cardinals? It is interesting. I feel like there's something very interesting going on there with Kyler Murray and Jacoby Brissett and the Cardinals. But in fantasy football, we do not care. A.D. Mitchell, by the way, Joseph G. said he's the Bank Examiner's Christmas lottery ticket. I mean, fair.
It's funny. I had a lottery analogy too lined up that I didn't end up using, but it is truly when you have a bunch of scratch offs and you're throwing them away. My family does Christmas scratch offs. Everyone just gets $20 of scratch offs, and you're like, wait a minute. Did I need 4 Christmas trees or 3 Christmas trees? And you have to dig through the trash. And I know there was a winner in here somewhere. And all of my best ball teams, obviously 80 has contributed almost nothing, I think, to this point. Maybe had 1 useful game so far. And I'm just rummaging through the trash, these lottery ticket best ball teams, because he really does look like a borderline league winner. He is seeing such good usage right now that that
is the thing. It's not just the big plays. The usage is not what you would ever expect from Adonai Mitchell. You would expect Adonai Mitchell to get the deep shots. You wouldn't expect this target volume and target share. That is what's really kind of changing the A.D. Mitchell calculus. We got 2 people here. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, Kyle. Joseph is wondering at tight end, should he stream Britton Strange, Dalton Kincaid against the Bengals, or Isaiah Likely? The clear answer there is Dalton Kincaid. But we have 2. That is if he plays. If not, we'll say Britton Strange. But we have someone else wondering a better Week 14 play. Darren Waller, Oronde Gadsden, or Britton Strange. We'll answer that specific question. We have 2 games now of Britton Strange. He had 93 yards in his Week 12 return, 5 catches, only 3 catches in Week 13, 45 yards and a touchdown. Just how are we feeling about Britton Strange? Parker Washington goes down for the Jaguars. Brian Thomas Jr. is back. But a lot of people, and very much including myself, are wondering, can we trust Britton Strange as a top 12 option? Or is the volume just not good enough? Where are we at on Britton Strange?
Yeah, top 12 is probably fair. I do think that the Jags still, the focal point of their offense, as much as he's been frustrating all year, if they're going to be a legit playoff contender, has to be to figure out how to get Brian Thomas Jr. going. It's just not going to work if they try to run their offense through screens to the running backs and try and get Britton Strange a touchdown or 90 yards every game. With that being said, that sort of limits the ceiling. At tight end, 4 tight ends have ceilings anyways. You're perfectly fine with Britton Strange, who, since returning to the lineup 2 games, has an 18% target share, which would be top 10. I think even better, it'd be top 6 or 7 among tight ends. He went from running a good amount of routes 2 weeks ago. It was his first game back from IR. You wouldn't expect necessarily a full route rate, to over 80% of the routes this past week on Sunday. So he is a full-time tight end who's a pretty good target earner. And the offense, as much as part of the reason I say they have to get Brian Thomas Jr. going, so they've actually been really good at throwing to every other position but wide receiver this year. And frankly, it's just the top 2, now just the top 1 since Travis Hunter is out. But they've been throwing extremely well when they're designing screens to the running backs, when they're getting tight ends open in the flat. It's just the players we care about the most who have been so frustrating. But the offense does work really well on these more design looks.
So Britton Strange, tight end is so strange at that tight end 1-2 borderline. It's just kind of been no man's land all year, and it's been weird. It's been guys rising and falling, new options have been pretty consistently emerging. Then you have guys like Dallas Goedert who are just fading, or Harold Fannin fades a bit strong. This has been a
He
really
comes and goes. He has a good game, and you're like, I think he's back in the top 10. Then he has two very, very floor games, and you're like, and he's back to 15. There are so many guys of that ilk this year.
It's just been a particularly unstable part of the board, but Britton Strange, he's done enough like to earn his shot there. And also, it has kind of a memory hold. He got off to a pretty strong start this season.
He did, yeah. He was
after a very strong
up these 4 and 5 catch games, yeah.
So people need to remember this isn't just a 2-game sample size. He actually did produce to begin the year, and of course, produced down the stretch last season. Got a lot of questions. Keep them coming. Jesse's here wondering, he's down very bad at receiver. He's wondering if we should stream A.D. Mitchell. So we would say A.D. Mitchell is definitely the streamer here out of A.D., Coker, or John Mechie. But beyond A.D. Mitchell, how do you feel about Jalen Coker? How do you feel about John Mechie? 2 guys hanging around a lot of waiver wires. They've been added in a lot of leagues, both toying with pretty nice floors, kind of hinting at ceiling, not quite getting there. After A.D. Mitchell, who is the ad of the week, how do you prioritize between Jalen Coker, John Mechie, or as Jesse mentions, maybe even someone like Dontavian Wicks?
It was actually Wicks for me, who since Matthew Golden, I believe he actually dealt with the shoulder injury a few weeks ago, came back for a game, has since missed 2 games, has a 22% target share. He's got a relatively strong air yard share. Obviously, he pops on, was it Thanksgiving, I believe he popped for 60-some yards, 2 touchdowns. I don't want to say he's the number 1 receiver. I still would describe that role to Romeo Doubs, but you could probably call him the team's 1B wide receiver until one of 2 things happens. Matthew Golden returns, but then has to push him out of the lineup, which frankly, Dontavian Wicks has played better than Matthew Golden this year. It would not stun me if Golden returns to be the rotational wide receiver 3, and Wicks gets to stay on the field for enough of the routes where you actually keep putting him in your lineup as a boom bust, but a boom bust flex play. Or Jaden Reed returns, which he's since been designated to return from IR. They could use the entire 3-week stat. He could be out for another 2 games, I think is what they have left for his 3-week window. So one of those 2 things happens. I think Wicks ends up probably just going back to the waiver wire. No guarantee either of those things happens this week. And if they don't, I think he's the relatively clear number 2 option. A.D. Mitchell, obviously the number 1. Coker, really good game last week, but it's his, I think it's literally his only good game of the year. He racked up a very strong 26% target share, over half of the team's air yards. Not quite as good as A.D. Mitchell, but the same thing I talk about. It's not only that he's earning targets, but it's that all these targets are juiced with yardage earning potential. But it's his only game of the year with a target share over 17%. It was his first game of the year with over 9.2 PPR points. And we know this team, unlike the Jets, where the Jets need a number 1 receiver to step up in the long run, and frankly, in the short run too, it's Tirico and McMillan. I don't see Jalen Coker outproducing McMillan very often going forward.
I will say I like Mechie as a flyer also, just because
he's fine.
It seems like the Jets, all they're trying to do down the stretch, they took these receiver flyers. They're trying to see what they have in them. Kind of like the Tennessee Titans. It's a bit refreshing to see a team actually get some young players and then actually give them opportunities. Mechie, very unfortunately, dropped a touchdown, A.D. Mitchell style yesterday. Pretty bad drop at the goal line, but fantasy managers would be asking even more questions about him if he had just caught it. Where his targets floor is looking surprisingly high, in the
27% target share in back-to-back weeks. I believe he had 8 targets this past week. We're talking about A.D. Mitchell having 12 and how awesome that is. 8 targets is a really strong outlook as well. Same with 27% target share. So I totally agree. I think Mechie would probably rank ahead of Coker for me. I would still have Wicks number 2, but Mechie's a strong play too. Like you said, they're not just trying out A.D. Mitchell. They definitely are. I mean, they have acquired both these players, I believe, both via trade. Obviously, no, Mitchell was, but I believe Mechie was as well.
Mechie was also a trade, yes.
Yeah, I wonder if that was the part of the Michael Carter trade, obviously with the Eagles, because Mechie, I think, was on the Eagles at some point. So I do think they're actually giving these players not only run, but designing up stuff for them because they want to figure out not if these players are obviously the number 1 receiver long term, but if they could fill out their receiver room with guys like Mitchell and Mechie after Garrett Wilson comes back.
Not sure I can follow you down the Wicks road, by the way. I added him in a league and benched him. I was I'm not doing this. Come on, man. Be sane. And then that happens.
As if Mechie is this reliable player.
He's been the Wicks thing. It's always either 9 targets or 0. Showed something against the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving Day. PPD OTC is wondering. First off, he's saying he's literally projecting Rotoworld on the wall of his local Spirit
returning fire.
Of his Spirit Christmas pop-up shop. Thank you very much for promoting the brand. Hopefully we get that spirit Christmas condemned. He's wondering, though, if it's over for Cris Boswell, and of course the answer is yes. Totally horrific offensive environment. And just the weather in Pittsburgh. One thing about the fantasy playoffs, really one thing I do all year, find kickers in domes. Not just good game environments, find kickers in domes. You can move on from Mr. Cris Boswell. You can't move on from Rico Dowdle. Frustrating situation where he kind of feels like he has to be in our lineups, but Chuba Hubbard is back, Kyle. He's at least healthier. And so when he's mixing in on his touches, he's making more of them than he did during the Dowdle heyday. Dowdle's pretty banged up, actually. The Panthers do have a bye this week. With that being said, so your fantasy regular season is over for your Carolina Panthers. When the playoffs get here in week 15, can you trust Rico Dowdle, or is Chuba Hubbard just too back for that to matter, Kyle?
I don't think you can trust him. I still think you can play him because he did very marginally outcarry, at least per PFF, outcarry Chuba Hubbard. But it is a full committee on the ground, and Chuba has mostly taken over the passing downs work. It's sort of similar to the Steelers with Warren and Gainwell, where I think the better player is getting slightly more work between the tackles, but it's on a bad team in which my favorite player, in that case it's Jaylen Warren, doesn't actually get many of the routes. Chuba Hubbard, who is the Gainwell analog in this scenario, got 63% of the routes last week. Fine, not great, 11% target share, but it's enough to really throw a wrench in the Rico Dowdle promise of him being a weekly RB2. Any game in which the Panthers are a negative game script, which, look, I love my Panthers. Love me some Panthers, lifelong Panthers fan. I still expect negative game script to be coming down the pipe over the final month of the season. Those are going to be rough spots for Rico Dowdle, especially because, like I said, not no routes, but a very low amount of routes, at least as of last week, but also doesn't have all of the carries either. So you probably have to knock him back into the RB3 ranks unless they have a really good matchup coming out of the bye. But not a ton of matchups are that good for the Panthers, sadly.
He's just going to kind of be in that Thunderdome on the RB2-3 borderline, where even in the weeks like week 13, where the whole player pool was available, it gets really shaky in the RB22 to 28 range. I don't really see Dowdle falling beyond that, but basically just gravity has taken hold again with Rico Dowdle, where he's a good guy. If you need a flex option, you're oh, thank God, at least have Rico Dowdle. But you're no longer jamming him into your RB2 spot. Pretty unfortunate. I think what honestly happened in the Panthers backfield is that Chuba was hurt. Rico was healthy. Rico very good, of course. He took advantage of it. But as you know, we've watched these games. He's been playing. There was one game where he got hurt 3 times and just kept coming back because he knew I can't go to the bench.
Packers game, I believe that was.
He knew that if he went to the bench, it could all be over. So he's been playing hurt. I just think it's been the rise and fall of their individual health statuses. So hopefully Rico does come out a little stronger in week 15 after getting week 14 to heal up. If you got questions, keep them coming. It can be slow going, but we will get to them. Laplandish has a philosophical question. The fantasy playoffs beginning. How do we generally manage bench spots for the playoffs? Do we like to have backups in case of injury? Do we at quarterback and tight end, that is? Do we max out the skill players? Do we do handcuff contingency ads? Things of that nature. Basically, what do you consider the ideal bench, Kyle, for the playoffs? My approach in a vacuum is I take it week by week. Wow, very brave of me. I try to maximize my roster for the week at hand, where I don't try to worry too much. It's week 13. I'm not really trying to worry about a week 16 matchup for a variety of reasons. That guy could get hurt, or the best run defender on that team and the matchup that you're worried about could get hurt. Where teams pull the plug much quicker this time of year, where players will play through injury in week 7 or 8 that they might not do in week 16 or 17 for a variety of reasons. So, of course, I don't not think ahead at all. But in general, I try to maximize for the week at hand. Do you have any philosophical advice for fantasy playoff roster construction during the playoffs?
Yeah, I think the only caveat I would have to that is that if you are maximizing for this week, your bench, only 1 or 2 of those spots matter, right? Because most of your bench is not obviously playing this week, with a few of them being I have a questionable player. I do need to have a second really strong option. For example, my FFPC main event team, which we look like we're going to squeak into what is the final round of the quote regular season. We've been starting Bam Knight for weeks, and we have a cavalry of terrible running backs because Bam Knight could have his job taken away at any moment. Once Trey Benson returns, Trey Benson's going to be the starter. So we have like Devin Singletary on this roster. We have a few other bad backup running backs, but we legitimately need on any given week 4 potential in our spot RB2. They're more like RB3s. We need a bunch of those guys to be able to fill in if Benson returns or if someone else gets hurt, we can start a maybe RB3. If we weren't in that spot, I'd probably be changing those very ugly RB3 spots to almost completely useless but high upside RB5, essentially. Your Blake Corums and your Tyler Algiers, who in most weeks you do not want to start them over what is the current version of Bam Knight. But if anything happens, and at this point we're down on time that things can actually happen, but if anything happens, you can start winning the flex or winning your RB2 spot with those players. So much like you, very brave of me to say it depends on your roster, but I think there are basically 2 modes of like emergency, I will need to secure some points, or this could be the playoff winner. And middling those 2, I actually think the backup quarterback and the backup tight end is just middling those 2. The backup tight end, like, what does having an extra Dalton Schultz or Jawan Johnson on your roster?
Here's what it really does do. I think we're kind of hitting at the same concept here where, of course, if you're going to stash an upside stash, like make sure there's actual upside is what I would say. Like Mike Evans, if you're stashing him, we don't really know what's going to happen, but if he actually does come back and play, like pretty strong odds, he's going to contribute. So I would say stash like truly plausible ups, or like if this player comes back, you actually know what the role is going to be, is what I would say, which is a little different than what you're saying, like focusing on running back touches. But I feel like what you were saying, I think you really were kind of saying you got to focus on touches over upside, where like, listen, this is emergency mode. This is crisis mode. Like we are totally screwed because Bam Knight is out. At least we have Devin Singletary now. Like have someone, I think other than like maybe 1 or 2 spots, you need to be able to look at the players on your bench and be like, I don't necessarily want to start this player, but if so-and-so got hurt, I know I could plug him in and they might actually score a touchdown, or they're at least getting like 10 touches. I really do think that should be the focus, but you kind of said the same thing with maybe just a little more eye towards upside. But I think you want a functional bench is what I would say, because next week is not promised in the fantasy playoffs. So I think I want a functional bench is how I would say it, Kyle.
Yeah, the time for like, I could squint and see it. Like, look, I still could.
Exactly. You don't, yeah. It could be someone that you don't know what they're going to do, but if they get the opportunity, you know they're actually going to produce, instead of like trying to squint. Like, well, even if this guy gets hurt in front of this guy, I don't actually know if he'll contribute or not. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, my example is sadly going to be like Josh Downs. We're like, you know what? I'm going to be stubborn. I actually still think Josh Downs is really good at football. I don't know if like Alec Pierce got hurt, if Josh Downs' role would even increase. He's been such a slot-focused wide receiver.
That is a perfect example where the upside is just too truly theoretical. Where like Blake Corum, if Kyron Williams gets hurt,
that's it.
There's no theoretical case. That's a perfect way. Like err on the side of Blake Corums instead of Josh Downs. That's how I would put it.
I'm doing that with like Luther Burden right now, where like if DJ Moore, what he's been doing with like a groin injury forever, if he misses a bunch of time, I don't know exactly what that means for him. He's another player where I think we maybe, or you can at least afford to cut ties. Like on this roster I'm talking about, if it was between Bam Knight or Devin Singletary and Luther Burden, in that case, I need the points. Or if it was between a Blake Corum and Burden, in that case, give me the player who could very realistically, I can see it right in front of me, win my league. Cutting out those tweener players. I mean, truly just cutting out the roster cloggers to the point where like you're not contributing now. I really don't know how you contribute later. We've ship sailed for those guys.
So to bring this full circle, is Mike Evans worth a stash right now? He seems like he's ramping up for a return. They really, really miss him. The Tez Johnson thing has run its course down the field. Chris Godwin, it's kind of like this, depending on the week, how he's feeling. How do we feel about stashing Mike Evans? You know, even when Mike Evans is going well, he's boom or bust. I have stashed Mike Evans in a league or two, though. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would totally stash Mike Evans if he's out there. We just talked about it, obviously, but he very much fits that profile of if he returns, if he's healthy. I think even with Egbuka playing well, he is clearly a splash play, consistent splash play guy where sort of like in that Nico Collins vein where you think it's boom bust, but then every week he catches at least 3 for 50 because he's getting a bunch of targets that are high value targets. So I would say he does very much fit that bill. If he's out there, once things hit for him, and look, maybe he doesn't hit, maybe he doesn't return in the next 2 or 3 weeks, maybe you're eliminated from the playoffs by then, but if things do hit for him, you're getting a weekly wide receiver 2 at worst, really. So I think he's almost the perfect stash under those conditions.
Mike Evans, it's kind of a strange environment. Baker's hurt. A lot of the receivers are hurt. There's a lot of receivers. That's the bottom line. When Mike Evans is back, even if I'm fading Mike Evans in the rankings, a Mike Evans fade will still be in the top 24. He's going to be a top 24 receiver. That's what you should focus on with Mr. Mike Evans. Staying on the concept of playoff stashes, staying on the concept of the Bucks. Sean Tucker, only 2 carries in Bucky Irving's return. Is he the kind of stash that Bucky was out and Sean Tucker wasn't even necessarily producing, Kyle? So is he just like an easy cut with the fantasy playoffs over here? Question via Ezra.
I don't know. He did have that one crazy game where he had like over 100 yards. He scored 3 touchdowns. He did the exact same thing last year too. But I do agree that I don't think I would rank him. I know for sure I wouldn't rank him ahead of Blake Corum if both their respective starters went down. Blake Corum would see all the work. Tyler Algier would see 25 carries and 3 catches in a game. If anything happened to Bijan Robinson, we're probably looking at 14 or 15 carries and a catch or 2 if Sean Tucker ends up being the starter. We don't know 100% that he would just reclaim that 1A job where Rachaad White was relegated to 1B duties. They could try and trot out Rachaad White as a starter once again, like give him another crack at that job. So I still think he's a decent stash, but he does start to fall. He's kind of the high end of the tweener where he's not a locked in RB1 if something happens to the starter. And we don't know that anything will happen to the starter, obviously. We hope it doesn't.
We hope it does not.
We hope it doesn't. Boy,
I know. By the way, if you have a question, do not sit on it. We will eventually get to it. Keep them coming. I'm Stevie. Hello, Stevie, here every week. He's terrified of an unhealthy but active Drake London with Kirk Cousins versus Seattle. Drake London was doubtful last week, which is actually an upgrade. Assuming he'll probably be questionable this week, might actually return. The Falcons, again, they've wanted to punish Kirk Cousins, not allow Drake London to play. It appears that's becoming untenable. Are you benching Drake London this week if he plays, and why is the answer no?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. Kirk Cousins is like the lowest level of I sort of trust you to get the ball into the hands of my favorite player. And I think even 80% or 60 or like 30% of Drake London's talent will just dog walk the rest of the pass catchers on this offense in terms of earning targets. And if there's anything Kirk Cousins can do, it's just get it into the hands of his wide receivers. Or for real, it's been just Kyle Pitts in 2 of his 3 starts. Pitts has his 2 highest catch totals of the year. Like, Pitts ain't keeping that. Even if Drake London is meaningfully hobbled, he will eat Pitts' lunch once he returns. So I don't know if that happens this week. I kind of don't think it does. Like you said, doubtful last week in the midst of, totally lost season. Maybe it doesn't return this week.
I actually think he will play this week, just to be honest.
I hope he does.
He's that kind of guy. Most football players that kind of guy where if they can take the field, they take the field. And as they should. I mean, these careers are short. Stats are not everything, but they're not nothing. Yeah. Like Drake London does not want to wait. Like if he thinks he can go out there and catch 6 passes for 90 yards, he's not going to waste that opportunity. So I'm going to lean on the right side of questionable. I wouldn't be shocked though if he were truly questionable. And then because of the circumstances you mentioned, they just erred on the side of caution. I do think he's going to actually give it a. So
if Marv doesn't play this week though, like we play Michael Wilson over almost like his numbers are insane.
Right? Michael Wilson's the wide receiver 1 overall if Marv sits again. So I mean that one's easy. By the way, so Stevie's here asking about Michael Pittman, 8 catches for 59 yards over the past 3 weeks. He seems to be the biggest victim of Daniel Jones turning back into a pumpkin, although I've seen some people claiming he hasn't turned back into a pumpkin. Of Daniel Jones, they're struggling on 3rd down, and the Colts just not front running. Michael Pittman, a great front-running option when the defense is on its heels because of the running game. So then you get chain-moving completions to Michael Pittman. But with the games either tied or the Colts playing from behind, they have to actually try to make something happen. And that means Alec Pierce down the field. How do you feel about Michael Pittman for the stretch run? Is he kind of back in that low-ceiling wide receiver 3 range that he's traditionally been in the past 2 years instead of back into that wide receiver 2 mix that he was for the first half of 2025?
Yeah, I think we can be comfortable pulling him out of the wide receiver 2 ranks. I mean, over the past 3 weeks, he has target shares last week of 17%. But when you're a relatively low ADOT player, 17% is just meh. He wasn't a low ADOT player last week, but that's generally what he's been. The week before that, hey, good 27% target share. It's also his best game over the past 3 weeks. of 14 PPR points, actually just a little bit less than 14. And the week before that, an 8% target share. Not to say that these 3 weeks are the only weeks that matter, but it is probably less than coincidental that the 3 weeks in which we've really seen his slump occur is the exact same 3 weeks in which Daniel Jones has just been getting pummeled. So I do kind of agree that I think this passing game is sadly winding down at the worst possible time. And also we are going to be constantly on Daniel Jones injury watch. Every single hit he takes, we're going to say, is that the one that breaks his leg, frankly. Like,
well, thankfully he doesn't take very many hits, except for, let's see here, every play.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, thankfully he just has eyes in the back of his head. He sees everything coming.
Would it kill Daniel Jones to have any like pressure awareness whatsoever? Like,
well, it's gonna kill him to not have it.
How long you been? Seriously, how long you been in the league, man? You don't feel the rush. It's still like
never.
I feel like even I would be sensing it a little bit by this point. Like, oh yeah, probably a tackler bearing down on me. Daniel Jones worries not about such things. We worry about Jaden Daniels because he's been struggling even when he's not hurt. He's been hurt constantly. PBD OTC wants to know. He's been hanging on to Jaden Daniels for weeks. Let's say he's deemed ready to go for week 14. Forget who they're playing this week. I think it's a relatively good matchup. Can we trust Jaden Daniels as a QB1? And let's use Jaden Daniels versus Jacoby Brissett as a hypothetical here, Kyle. How do we feel about Jaden Daniels with the most important weeks of the fantasy season upon us?
It's the Vikings this week, which we talked about are good for explosive plays. They are in general like a competent defense. I don't think it's like a cakewalk matchup, but I would hope at least something can get going for Jaden Daniels. But like, he's been rough this year, man. It's certainly the injuries are in part to blame. The lack of weapons, because obviously Terry McLaurin hasn't played a bunch. Deebo Samuel missed a little bit of time, was banged up. Their depth receivers have been getting hurt nonstop as well. That has been part of
What's the deal with that, by the way? I feel like every depth Commanders receiver just like instantly gets hurt. That's been
Treylon Burks broke his finger, I believe, broke like his middle finger. Jalen Lane's been dealing with a rib issue. I think he's been
Chris Moore, Noah Brown, I believe.
Noah Brown, yeah. I forgot about Chris Moore too. So yeah, all these guys just keep getting banged up. Terry McLaurin has barely played with Jaden Daniels this year. I certainly don't want to say Jaden Daniels is solely responsible for this sophomore slump, but he is in part. Like, his accuracy has looked worse. It looks like defenses have been able to rattle him more, and it's not like he's putting up elite rushing numbers when he's in the lineup. Jacoby Brissett as the line, it's easily Brissett in the first game back. It's brutal to say, but like, what if I just bank 280 passing yards and 2 touchdowns? Like, sure.
I mean, you can't play Jaden Daniels over the best quarterback in football. You can't do it. Brissett, I mean, listen, I'm expecting this to stop at some point, but he's already blown.
Is when you're expecting it to stop.
He's already blown past the previously known boundaries of like the Flacco theorem. It ends after 4 weeks. Jacoby Brissett's like, what if it didn't, brother?
We're in uncharted territory right now. We've blown past the barrier.
He's in interstellar space. Yeah, he's escaped the orbit of the sun. Jacoby Brissett is in interstellar space. So then, people are wondering about Michael Wilson. Is it over? Cut or stash him? Schedule is mid at best. So first off, there's 2 different answers here for Michael Wilson. If Marvin Harrison Jr. and his heel injury do not play in week 14, or if MHJ is in, do you keep Michael Wilson on your team if, like today at the press conference, the Cardinals say MHJ is fine for week 14? But then just give us the lay of the land for Michael Wilson, Kyle.
Yeah, we saw as soon as Marvin Harrison Jr. came back last week, Wilson wasn't completely erased. He earns a 20% target share. I don't have like the on-off splits right now for when Marvin Harrison was on or off the field. He was off the field a decent amount dealing with the heel injury. It looked like he was going to leave much earlier in the game, and then he eventually did leave, like officially left in the fourth quarter, listed as questionable. I would assume like a 20% target share had Marvin Harrison closed out that game, never injured the heel. That could be somewhere around the 15% range. And honestly, that's not really playable at all, even on this pass-heavy team. With that being said, I do think there's a lot of outcomes in which Michael Wilson is either useful or just awesome. Like Marvin Harrison Jr. plays through this heel issue, but is completely banged up. He's doing decoy stuff. Like, imagine Marvin Harrison Jr. doing decoy stuff. I just can't imagine. Like, he could be out there as a decoy this week, and Michael Wilson could still be that chain mover. He wouldn't be as effective in terms of fantasy purposes, but he'd be playable. It'll be tough to say, like, going into the game if you know you should play him, but there's at least a chance you get a usable week out of him. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. misses, obviously we made the joke earlier, but it's not even a joke. Like,
if Marvin Harrison sits, I mean, Michael Wilson has firmly established himself on the wide receiver 1-2 borderline.
Yeah,
is what I would say without like any artifice or bit. And he's frankly in the running for wide receiver 1 overall. But yeah, he's in the 12 to 14 range of MHJ sits here. We have a question real quick. Someone's running, is it Daugherty or Daugherty? It is neither. We insist on the third, even more difficult, even less common pronunciation of Daugherty. So we sometimes make fun of these football players, like, why does he say Bijan? Why does he say Tarad? You could say, why do I say Daugherty? And if you have to say it, just say Dardee is how I'd say it. And just do it really fast. Don't try to think about it. That's the easiest thing to do with any difficult to pronounce last name here. Metal Mask 3 is wondering, do you see Mahomes letting it rip rest of season, or is that just a result of the Cowboys defense and Kansas City desperation? I certainly think it needs to be their approach, Kyle. They do not have an effective running game. They have an effective 2 to 3 yard running game, which is more than some teams can say. But there's no explosive element in that Chiefs backfield. What do you think you're going to see from Patrick Mahomes down the stretch, who had been in a mini slump for the Cowboys, did very much wake him up on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I mean, it was still another game in which he largely just took checkdowns. A 7.1 ADOT is below his season-long average. He's been below 8 for, I think, every game but one since Rashee Rice returned. I do think there is an element of Rashee Rice's game that is incredibly explosive after the catch. So the fact that they are trying to get him the ball more and in turn lowering Mahomes' ADOT is not a bad thing. You want the ball in the hands of your best player. If that comes 5 or 6 yards downfield, of course, you'd probably prefer it to come 12 yards downfield. But Rashee Rice is so good with the ball in his hands that I still think he's their most explosive player, bar none. So I do think whether or not the ADOT rises or falls, like you said, the Chiefs have to let it rip, whether that's deep passes or short passes, don't care too much. And I think we've seen since Rashee Rice returned, we've seen a few different games where Mahomes goes into desperation mode, which I just classify as running. Seriously, especially because they are a coin flip to make the playoffs at this point. If you look at sportsbooks odds, I think every game truly could be, and it should be, desperation mode.
No, every game is a playoff game for the Chiefs. That actually is not a cliche. They're in playoff mode from here on out.
So I think if they have that mentality, which I would think they do, it's not just me saying, what if it happens this way? They have to have that mentality. If we get a little bit more rushing, it doesn't have to go back to the full first 5 weeks of the year. Mahomes is putting 50 yards multiple times. But if we can just bank somewhere closer to 25 to 30 rushing yards, and the offense looks really good even as a short passing attack, probably still a top 5 overall fantasy quarterback. But I think at this point, I maybe would flip a Drake May over him. But what are the odds you have both those players?
I do think we're going to see a more active Chiefs offense where instead of trying control the pace of play, subdue the opponent, I think we are going to get a little more what we saw against the Cowboys, where it's a playoff game, leave nothing to chance. Even though we know in a typical game script, we're probably 80% odds to win this game. They want those odds to be 95%. I do think we're probably going to see more early season version of Mahomes that we saw instead of what was ever going on midseason. It was kind of weird and annoying. Zinku, who is the best Hail Mary QB streamer for week 14? Must win to clinch a playoff berth. He tried to, that didn't work, and he did not go goblin mode for Zinko. Not a good QB streamer week. I don't know your top streamers, Kyle, but CJ Stroud in Kansas City, not a good spot. Tua, again, against the Jets. Tyler Shuck in Tampa, everyone on the road. Tyrod Taylor against the Dolphins. Marcus Mariota against the Vikings if Jaden Daniels does not play. Do you like anyone from that bunch? Are there any names that you had that I did not mention?
If Jaden Daniels doesn't play, I think Marcus Mariota is a good bet in terms of he's been efficient enough to basically play a full 4 quarters and throw a touchdown, sometimes 2 in almost all of his starts. And he runs. He's not the runner that Jaden Daniels is, but very few quarterbacks are, and they still call up those runs for him. I think he's probably a mid-range QB2. And Tyrod Taylor has basically the exact same profile, where he's not the runner that Justin Fields is, but frankly, he's a more accurate passer than Justin Fields. They let him pass more often, and he still gets to run a decent amount. He has over 40 rushing yards in 2 of his 3 starts. He has a rushing touchdown in 1 of his 3 starts, and he has at least 1 passing touchdown in all 3 of his starts this year. So for me, assuming, or at least saying that there's some risk if you pick up Mariota, he isn't even the starter this week. Tyrod Taylor is the very obvious number 1 starter just because of the rushing. It pads out what could be really bad box scores through the air.
Tyrod's just the safest too. I say this, knock on wood.
Sure.
Tyrod took a real big hit on this guy's going to miss time at some point. But if injuries were off, Tyrod runs and he's got passing volume. This is a high volume passing attack right now, relatively speaking, of course, but Tyrod Taylor. So he is kind of the platonic ideal of a streamer. Nick here said the bank examiner staking his property after the first bad JSN game of the year. Yeah, the bank examiner's plans are measured in centuries, unfortunately. you thought it was safe with JSN. And then
can we take Denny's phone away? I find out every time this guy tweets or now on Blue Sky posts something, the exact opposite happens. Even like when he's like wrong and conceding that he's wrong, it will turn him into being right again. For that one, it's JMO. We had him dead, and by we I mean me. I had him dead to rights on JMO. He was tweeting on Blue Sky that JMO was washed and wasn't good, and then immediately Amon-Ra St. Brown gets hurt, and obviously JMO, he's going to bury me for the rest of the season. Like there's just no way, or at least for the next week or two, which will be enough to bury me. On the opposite end, he graciously tweeted out my week 10 or no, like week 13 fantasy takeaways article. And I said, like, JSN at this pace will have not only one of the greatest seasons of all time, but one that by some measures may almost never be replicated. He tweeted that out. That was very kind. And the moment he tweeted out, first stinker from JSN, you gotta be kidding me.
We've got a lot of good questions. We're going to try to get to all of them. Metal Mask, by the way, I was wondering what was up with the way Chris Collinsworth, our coworker, was saying Marcus Mariota on Sunday night. I can guarantee you what happened there is that Chris probably asked Marcus, how do you actually pronounce your last name? And then he committed to saying that, which sometimes we do on the podcast and sometimes does sound unnatural. I can guarantee you, though, that was the result of Chris Collinsworth research. I'm Jesse wondering, as Woody Marks finally sees the means of production, I just got the very obvious joke. Not saying it's not funny because it was obvious, but 16 plus carries each of the past 3 weeks. Getting the good work, Kyle. Not really producing much. Struggling.
I was going to say, what are we producing
24.
here?
Yeah,
we're producing a very low value product, and it's unfortunate because this, as Jesse points out, he has absolutely pretty much completely taken over the RB1 role. There's still a little bit of Nick Chubb involvement, but as far as participation goes, you're getting 50-ish% of the routes every week, which is like a 2.5 down roll. You're getting well over 50% of the snaps, well over 50, sometimes over 60 to 70% of the carries. That's all really good numbers. On a lot of offenses, that would be good for like high-end RB2 numbers. But Woody Marks hasn't been a particularly efficient runner this year, and the Texans offense has been pretty, I don't want to say bad. They're just boring. They're also bad sometimes, but they're equally boring and bad. It just doesn't set up their running backs, in this case, Woody Marks, for great production. So yeah, he has totally taken over the factory, and he's just putting out quite the boring product.
So the Texans real quick this week. I thought they had a good matchup. They have the exact opposite. It's the Chiefs on the road. They're going to be road dogs. The Chiefs have a good run defense. The means of production, unfortunately, going to be reclaimed by I was just trying to think of a less incendiary way to say what I was saying. I can't think of it, so I'm not going to say it. Is Jordan Mason a total waste of a waiver claim? If Aaron Jones misses time yet again, Aaron Jones, well, I'm not trying to make fun of the guy, but to slightly make fun of the guy, loves to injure his shoulder. The Vikings down is absolutely horrific. Jordan Mason, we've already seen this movie. He didn't do anything with it. Will anything be different the second time around, Kyle?
I mean, no. Actually, I'm just going to say no, because the previous time it happened, they were still getting starts from Carson Wentz, who's clearly the best quarterback of their 3-quarterback room. Now they're going to be getting starts.
You really learn why when you're watching Carson Wentz in real time. Is like, listen, man, I know JJ McCarthy's probably not good, but this cannot continue. Oh, okay, that's why I was continuing.
Yep.
Because of what JJ and Brosmer are doing. That's why they were literally almost letting him die on the field.
Yeah, and obviously Godspeed and Wentz's recovery, but they should have continued letting him die on the field. This has been
experimental surgery season. Come on, man. Come on.
Did they play? Well, it was before he got hurt, but I do believe they played a game across seas. Like they could have gotten some very experimental surgery.
They did. I believe it might have even been in Germany.
I think so too.
So,
wait, or were they the Ireland game? They played the Steelers in Ireland.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know what they got going.
You could find some funky medicine out there. He wasn't that hurt. Yeah, he wasn't that hurt, but maybe just like stash the medicine just in case you needed to keep him out there, because we got, like we talked about on previous shows, per EPA. JJ McCarthy is just about, like, quite literally one spot shy of the worst quarterback to take the field since the turn of the century. And I haven't looked at the numbers yet. I'm going to assume Brosmer, he's going to give him a run for his money, which is incredible to have, like, the worst quarterback in the NFL on your roster and then roll insane snake eyes a second time and get that guy again, which Brosmer appears to be. Like, never, ever, ever go to this casino if you're a Vikings fan. It doesn't seem like luck's in your favor. So, no, I would say Jordan Mason's going to be a kind of 2-down thumper on a real bad team.
Speaking of the Vikings, questions are mounting about Kwesi, the GM. Traded a 4th-round pick or thereabouts for Adam Thielen. Is his job in danger? And Benjamin David, very loyal viewer and tweeter. I'm sorry if this is asked. He's wondering if his wife will come back if he drops Justin Jefferson. What do we do with Justin Jefferson? Can we continue to play him? First, give us your take on Kwesi, I guess. And yeah, then we're not going to bench Justin Jefferson, right? Give us another Vikings update here.
I don't know, man. Oh, I'm just looking at the Jefferson.
Kwesi is – they probably honestly should have just kept Rick Spielman. He was really high variance, but he was like a true boom bust. It's just mostly been misses for Kwesi. It's been very – you hate to see it because he's a GM who actually went outside the box. He's been aggressive. He's been trying different things. They have not worked. Rick Spielman loved to stockpile draft picks. A lot of them did not work, but most of them did.
Well, because the way he stockpiled draft picks was like, I'm in the 4th round. I'll trade back for 7-7.
I know.
Like,
listen, he loved that. No one liked 7th-round picks more than Rick Spielman. He's actually not a joke. But
I've actually met Rick Spielman before. I think he's an Ohio State alum, so he was did something on campus, and I talked to him for a little bit. We talked about like 8 years ago, going for 2 down 15 or going for 2 down 8, the whatever it is. And he was on board. He was on board with the numbers. And I'm sure that's part of the trading back thing is he's gaining surplus value in the spreadsheets, but ultimately like these guys aren't even going to make your roster. With that being said, on Kwesi, I think the drafting stuff is overblown. Not that he hasn't like had a lot of draft picks that have been bad. Like I don't like.
Well, he said fewer draft picks and more of them have been bad.
I would say overblown because just every team, every decade has a 3 to 4 year stretch where they're just terrible at drafting. Like you look at when the Seahawks solved the draft because they took like corners with long arms and then they kind of just immediately went back to being a league average drafting team. I think some teams can be worse at drafting. We were joking in Slack about like Trent Baalke. He's like, how many ACLs does he have? 0? Get him on our board. When's he playing football? 2 years from now? Get him on our board. And you can make some like very unsound decisions. Think about like the way the Panthers for the past few years up until T-Mac seemed to evaluate wide receivers. It just made no sense to take guys like Mingo and Leggett where they did, and yet they did. But I don't think the Vikings have like fundamental flaws in drafting as much as like they just kind of ran as bad as you can run. I think you muted yourself.
I was muted. The fundamental flaw here for this current Vikings front office has just been they take stands. They keep taking stands on the wrong guy.
I think Andrew Berry is actually maybe a good GM. Took the worst stand in NFL history with John Watson. And if you wanted to fire him for that, go for it. Don't care. It's fine.
But back to the real key question here. Will Ben's wife return if he drops Justin Jefferson? And what do we do with Justin Jefferson?
As I started this sort of conversation, I just pulled up his box scores. These are crippling, man. 2.4 fantasy points, 8.8 fantasy points, 11.11 fantasy points, 7.7 fantasy points. And frankly, his target share numbers are good. They've been, last week was 20%, which actually isn't that good, like for anyone, let alone Justin Jefferson. 33%, 30%, 35% before that. But like, if you're telling me this offense is as bad as it is, I need to see Justin Jefferson at the 40 and 50% mark, not only for fantasy purposes, but I frankly think it's a shame that they're just not like, how do we get this offense going? Maybe it doesn't get going, but let's target Justin Jefferson on like 3 of every 5 plays. Let's do it that way. And that's not even what they're doing. So you do like, is he a wide receiver 2? Maybe he's maybe a wide receiver 2. He's certainly not a wide receiver 1. If you made me pick wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 3, I would very obviously pick wide receiver 3. That's how bad it is. You do not have to start him. You probably still should.
Well, I think here's how I would describe Justin Jefferson. I would just say he's a starting fantasy wide receiver still. Like if you can accept like the downside and the risk for someone like Adonai Mitchell or Dontavian Wicks, you just have to do it with Justin Jefferson. That's really what I would get to with Justin Jefferson. The wide receiver 1 thing, that's over. Wide receiver 2 even is probably over. I feel like you just can't go out with Justin Jefferson. But this is not scientific, of course. But as you know, Kyle, I could not go out in my survivor pool on Bo Nix. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't pick the Broncos.
You're going to go on Bo Nix next week.
Well, I don't think I might actually have to change that. We'll talk about that later, though. I don't think you can go out with Justin Jefferson. Some people don't like that kind of like old school rock-headed thinking. I really do not think you can go out of your fantasy playoffs with Justin Jefferson on your bench.
I think most teams probably do not afford to bench him because I agree. I'm not pushing him lower than wide receiver 3. And most teams, if you're starting like 2 wide receivers in a flex or 3 wide receivers in a flex or even multiple flexes, a wide receiver 3 makes your wide receiver 3 spot. That being said, if you went like 0 RB early and you got to like make smash picks like JSN or like Puka went in the second round sometimes, you got Rashee Rice at a discount. There are spots where you don't need to start Justin Jefferson, but I agree. The average fantasy team probably still at least gets him into the flex spot.
We have time for a few more questions. If you've been sitting on one, the time is now. We've had several Rondé Gadsden questions. Is he a drop? Is the tenor of most of them, Kyle, where the production has been drying up. Now the quarterback's hurt. Even if Herbert plays in week 14, which I bet he will, it's the Eagles. They have been locking down opposing offenses. I think in a vacuum, you're probably not dropping a Rondé Gadsden, but let's say roster realities, quote unquote, force you to do it. Will you regret it? Is it something you can even consider dropping a Rondé Gadsden?
You can consider it, but like assuming you were starting him, who are you going to get that's better? Like Dalton Schultz maybe projects for like 2 more fantasy points this week. I just don't care because Rondé Gadsden's a lot better and has a ceiling at tight end that not only Schultz doesn't have, but all but like 4 or 5 tight ends don't have. And he's still up until last week, which maybe this isn't a blip. Maybe last week continues, but he still is earning targets at a really strong clip for a tight end. Last week, a 10% target share, not acceptable for our fantasy tight ends. But before that, 24, 20, 21, 18, 22, like 6 straight games of being tight end, like top 5 tight end numbers in terms of earning targets, and was putting up top 5 fantasy numbers on that top 5 role as well. I do expect the Chargers to be worse going forward than they were in that sample because they had Joe Alt in a bunch of that sample and they don't. And that appears to be absolutely killing them. But you're still telling me you have what should be a very high usage tight end with at least probably good quarterback play. We'll see if Justin Herbert plays on a really bad offensive environment. That's better than Dalton Schultz or Jawan or even Brenton Strange, all of whom are, viable tight end ones. I just want to side with both talent and ceiling, which has been very much demonstrated by Gadsden.
Yeah, Gadsden, that really is what it comes down to. Maybe the floor is a little bit lower than someone like Dalton Schultz. It's not a lot of it lower, and we know the ceiling is just so much higher. It's kind of what it comes down to for Rondé Gadsden. We have someone promising cheap viewers again, but let's just see here. Let's just click that and see what happens. And my computer's deleted itself. We have almost out of time. We're not benching Kyren Williams. That would be insane, right, Kyle Dvorchak? But is this Blake Corum stuff just at crisis levels? For Kyren Williams at this point, he's no longer in the top 12. Everyone knows that. Is he tumbling almost down to like the RB2-3 borderline? How bad have things gotten for Kyren Williams?
I don't think they're that bad. Look, I drafted very little Kyren because I thought this would be a very real possibility that we would find ourselves at this exact spot, potentially even earlier than we ended up getting there. And I think it's largely borne out that once you take away 20 to 30% of the carries, snaps, routes, however you want to slice it up from Kyren Williams, he goes from being a top 8 fantasy option to pretty quickly a back end RB2. And the addition of Devontae Adams, which is just the addition of a goal line vulture, has really crushed him. But just looking like raw fantasy points, which I think is where this question kind of stems from, is like he's not putting up fantasy numbers. He's finished as this week, he's right now the RB20, which is fine. Week before that, total dud. Week before that, RB15, RB5, RB8, RB25, 11, and 2. Like, he is still getting the majority of the work on what is potentially the NFL's best offense. He's not getting enough work to justify being an RB1, but he's not losing enough work to Blake Corum. He's still clearly, I don't even want to call him the 1A. He's still the number 1 running back. I think last week, if he lost more work to Corum than you had expected, it's because he literally got listed as questionable to return at one point. He was very banged up. He did return, and I think we can expect the normal workload of number 1 with a meaningful number 2 going forward. On the Rams offense, that's still fantasy RB2 numbers. You didn't draft him to be that. I get it's frustrating, but we're not benching him.
The killer, by the way, is the Devontae Adams stuff, where it's not even a joke. Devontae Adams is the closest thing the Rams have to a goal line back. But the bottom line is, if someone is getting as many touches as Kyren Williams and an offense as good as the Rams are, even if they're not producing at the level you were hoping and expecting, he's not fallen off to the point where you can even consider benching him. But Stevie said, pretending Justin Jefferson teams are in the playoffs is more delusional than Aaron Rodgers thinking he should still play. That might be true, actually. So you got me there. Last question, unfortunately. Zinku is Kamani Vidal and Amari Hampton What do we do if Amarian Hampton is back this weekend? I'm going to have Amarian Hampton ranked ahead of Kamani Vidal. Do you agree? How big of a mess does this Chargers backfield become in a tough matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday Night Football?
Yeah, tough matchup. Offense is playing really not great football with Joe Alt out, and obviously Joe Alt's done for the year. Don't expect that to improve anytime soon. But has Kamani Vidal really forced the issue in the way that Rico Dowdle meaningfully forced the issue? And the best he could do was a 1B committee role for a few weeks. Kyle Monungai was the exact same situation. He forced the issue, and DeAndre Swift was still the starter and easily the lead back, even more so than like Chuba Hubbard was when Rico Dowdle returned. But all has played well. Like, he had another really good fantasy score this past week, but he's also had a bunch of duds, and they have invested more in Amarian Hampton than any of those other situations I just mentioned. Maybe there's a 1 week biding our time period where they ease Hampton back in. But my sort of read on the situation is that they are holding Hampton out to the point which they have because they probably want him back to that workhorse role when he is able to handle it, and no sooner, obviously. So we're playing him. Like you said, I'm going to have Hampton well ahead of Kamani Vidal. I would think Kamani Vidal will be at worst a thorn in the side of Hampton, where like maybe he does pick up 6 or 7 carries, which he obviously wouldn't have done before Hampton got hurt. But I don't even think we'll be calling this a committee.
Really, really good stuff from Kyle. Really good stuff from our viewers, listeners, readers, whatever you want to call them. Your questions make the show happen. My apologies for being a few minutes late. It will not stop snowing in the Midwest, creating a logistical nightmare for me. I'll just leave it at that. My children are home safe, though. I can tell you that much. Yeah, well, sure. December 1st and can't stop snowing. Really, really great sign for the winter. Hopefully a lot of good signs for your fantasy teams heading into the playoffs. We appreciate you dropping by so much. Check out Kyle's waiver wired column if you've not already done so. Check out Denny and I when we come back for another episode of the Rotoworld Football Show on Tuesday. So for Kyle, I'm Pat. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you real soon, including this exact same time next Monday on the NFL on NBC YouTube page.